He received his BS, MS, PhD, all in electrical engineering from respectively from Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur, University of California, Berkeley, Iowa State University. Dr. Bose is a member of U.S. National Academy of Engineering, a foreign member of both the Indian National Academy of Engineering and Chinese Academy of Engineering, and fellow of both Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, that's IEEE, and Chinese Society of Electrical Engineers. It's a pleasure to have three of you on this webinar, and I'll hand over to the Professor Abhyankar.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Pannala, for introducing us. I'll just share my screen and you could let me know if it is visible.
Yeah, we can see
okay. That. You can see the first slide?
Yes.
And now I have changed the slide. Can you see the changed slide?
Yes, we can see the change in slides. So
can you minimize
Thank you. The lower corner one, I can see the Microsoft. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. So can I start now?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Pannala. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. I'm Abhijit Abhyankar, and the team, the Indian side, a team working on DSO functions and the regulatory and market framework, that is basically theme 7 and theme 10. We were working on DSO white paper for last about 4 to 5 months. And there's some disturbance, some noises, background noises there.
Oh yeah, I'll mute it. Sorry.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah. So we have been working on preparing this DSO white paper titled Distribution System Operators in India, Their Need, Institutional Frameworks, and Regulatory and Policy Considerations. And I, along with Mr. A.K. Saxena of TERI, we would be presenting the findings of or the recommendations that we have made while writing this while writing this paper on behalf of the entire UISS team on Indian side. We had one stakeholders workshop that took place about a week back, where we presented the key findings of this white paper to the entire gamut of stakeholders, various stakeholders, including the regulators, policymakers, distribution system operators, transmission system operators, to obtain their feedback about the white paper. And currently, and the draft paper was circulated amongst them. And now currently we are working on the feedback, so that in another month to 1.5 months time, we should be ready with the final version of the paper. This is the team that contributed to the preparation of a white paper from IIT Delhi side, TERI in New Delhi, and IIT Kanpur side. These are the people who have worked on preparing this white paper. So in next about 25 minutes or so, myself and Mr. Saxena, we would be talking about what we have come out with in terms of this DSO white paper. All of you know about the emerging electric energy landscape. Everybody is aware of it, but the context, it keeps on changing as per the country. So long as India is concerned, we have ambitious target set for 2030 in terms of renewable energy installation. 500 gigawatt of renewable energy is what we plan to aim to install by 2030. And 2070 is the mission net zero. So we plan to become net zero by 2070. And as a result of this, there's a substantial increase in renewables in generation mix that is very apparent. And there is a drive to make electrification clean. So clean electrification drive is also happening in India in terms of e-mobility, in terms of e-cooking and whatnot. And as a result of this, there's going to be large scale distributed energy resources embedded within the distribution system. Many of them will be behind the meters. Like you have rooftop solar PVs, battery energy storage systems, electric vehicles, and controllable loads and the variants thereof. And it's a global phenomena. This is not India specific phenomenon. Now, what are the challenges that emerge out of this? Basically, because of the existence of the DERs, your distribution system tends to become active in nature. And the active distribution network has its own set of challenges. Like you have bidirectional power flow, and because of which you have to take care of certain protection coordination issues, voltage regulation, and all that. Then there is a lack of visibility because the DR sources resources, they are embedded behind the meter many a times, and the system operator at times is it cannot see those sources, and the operation and controllability is beyond the scope of the distribution system operator. So what do we do to handle this? That is another challenge. Then the consumers, they become prosumers, and now they would start looking for opportunity to trade their electricity commodities. How do we provide framework for them? That is another challenge. The DRs, some of them, they have inherent flexibility associated with them. So how do we exploit this flexibility for effective utilization so that it can help the grid in a way? How do we do that? That is another challenge. Creation of large scale data. So data, in what optimum way can we handle the data? How do we use it for betterment of the system operation? So thoughts should be given on this also. Market is inevitable because the true spirit of open access will come into picture only if you allow open access or the market access to electricity commodities generated by the prosumers. And there's going to be change in the consumption trends. So you have to handle this. So the conventional way of utilization is going to change. So to handle all this globally, the DSOs, distribution system operator concept, is envisioned to provide reliable, resilient, cost-effective electricity delivery when you have high-scale DR at the distribution level. Now in India also, you can see that the trend is on the rise so long as introduction of DRs installed solar capacity in India. Uh, you can see that there is an exponential rate of increase in terms of solar PV installation. Of course, all these are not rooftop solars. These also include large scale utility scale solar as well. But the trend is important. Trend is increasing. On the right hand side, you can see the electric vehicle cells. So barring the slump that you can see in 2019, 2020 on account of the COVID, you can see that the sale of electric vehicles is on the rise in India. Now, DSO discussion has been happening in India as well. And one of the first reports to talk about DSO was Samast report, which was published by Forum of Regulators way back in 2016. So the Samast report talks about the scheduling and metering arrangements and deviation settlement, etc. And it mentions that you need an entity which is neutral, independent, transparent, non-discriminatory. And it mentions that DSO on the bylines of state load dispatch centers to be established. So this is the first time that any report or any discussion that has happened on DSO in India way back in 2016. Power Ministry's technical committee report on large scale integration of renewable energy again in 2016 talks about DSO to optimally utilize the DERs. Then you have capacity building report, again Forum of Regulators report called Kabil report in 2018. It mentions the subgroup in capacity building report. It recommends the establishment of DSOs in its state, which would further interact with the load dispatch centers. And then finally, the latest mention of DSO
Yeah, Professor Abhyankar, I think your screen is frozen. Looks like we lost.
I think Dr. Abhyankar, you lost your voice.
Yeah.
I think maybe some connectivity issue.
Yeah. So maybe he will join soon. Sorry for the interruption. No, Professor Abhyankar, can you hear us?
We have to call him.
Mr. Saxena, you're muted.
Yeah, I think there's some network issue at his end and he will rejoin very soon. I think he will have to disconnect and connect again, and it takes a bit of a time.
Professor Srivastava, could you please text him so that he will join again? Maybe he is thinking of doing it.
I'm trying to call him and see, check up that.
Oh.
He's not responding. It means he's attending to the problem.
Yeah, he's reconnecting actually. I just called.
So he will be reconnecting. We'll resume shortly.
So I suggest that we move on to maybe US part, or maybe Dr. Saxena can fill in between.
I think maybe it's better that Professor Anjan Bose starts it, because you know the
Exactly.
Sorry,
Yeah.
he joined. Yeah.
Sorry about. Can I share my screen and start?
Yeah, please go ahead. And then can you please cut off your video so that you can save some bandwidth?
I think I should do that. Yeah. Thanks for the suggestion. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry about that. So these are the entities, various entities in power sector. The way of working of these entities need to be changed. I think I'll not spend much time on this. With this background, we decided to write a white paper as one of the key deliverables under Theme 7 in UI Assist with this broad objectives. So as I said, we have been working for about 5 to 6 months on this particular paper. So the objectives of white paper were as follows: to study the existing system in India, that is DISCOM operations, review international practices, and study the best practices dealing with issues related to introducing DSOs, highlight the need for introducing DSOs in India, why and how DSO would help in betterment of the system that we wanted to establish. What are the critical enabling technologies that also we wanted to be part of our paper? What are the possible institutional frameworks? Establishing that is another objective. Then what are the possible market designs? And one of the final objectives was cataloging building blocks in implementing DSOs in India. So with these objectives in mind, we wrote a paper having 6 chapters. Chapter 1 was introduction, which talked about the international experiences and what is it that we should be learning from international experiences has been elaborated in chapter 1. Of course, as I said, this is at the paper is at the draft state right now. We recently got a stakeholders workshop, feedback from the stakeholders workshop, and we are currently working on it for the final version. Second chapter talked about the active distribution networks attributes and the pathway to DSO. So what are the functions that DSO should discharge? That was discussed and elaborated in chapter 2. And how do we envision DSO in the Indian context? So that was underlined in chapter 2. In chapter 3, we talked about various institutional frameworks for DSO in India. So as you can see, India has got heterogeneous nature of distribution system operations. So we have discoms of varied nature, varied operational practices. Different states have got different grid codes, regulations, and whatnot. So we thought that one option for creating DSO institutional framework may not be appropriate. So we thought that there could be different ways of introducing DSOs in India. So the 4 possible variants we have proposed in chapter 3. Chapter 4 talked about what are the commodity trading opportunities, the local level markets. All the details have been proposed and what could be good for Indian conditions. There is a recommendation on that also. In chapter 5, we talk about regulatory and policy landscape, wherein we enlist what are the various regulations or the grid codes which are relevant for the discussion on DSO. And in chapter 6, we come out with a list of recommendations which Mr. Saxena will elaborate on. Here are a few key recommendations and findings under different section. I'll quickly touch upon this. So first of all, we talk about DSO functions and relevant codes. So there are so we have come out with a list of DSO functions and what are the grid codes, existing grid codes, which talk about these functions. Now, by introduction of DSO, we will introduce a set of new functions as well. At the same time, the existing functions, they need to be reworked, and appropriate grid codes and regulations also need to be rewritten. So here is a list of possible DSO functions if the DSOs come into existence. And the top block shows the existing functions so that these functions in one form or the other are performed in some way by the existing entities like DISCOMs, SLDCs, etc. At the bottom, you can see the new functions that are being proposed, like forecasting of DERs. Currently, only net forecasting is being done at the DISCOM level, but then we need DER forecasting as well. Then the market facilitation is currently not being performed. It's not introduced at all. So we need to have grid codes or regulations that need to be framed to facilitate that. Then to exploit the flexibility services to convert them into ancillaries, etc. So we need to have new regulations. So in the white paper, we have detailed this out, and we have also, since this is going to be a policy pronouncement paper, we have also talked about, I mean, of course, it will be used by regulators as well. So we have also mentioned what are the possible grid codes, potential grid codes that need to be revisited to accommodate DSOs. Then the technical requirements have been elaborated in chapter 2. It talks about state-of-the-art SCADA, then the two-way strong redundant communication link between SCADA and IoT devices and IEDs. Then it talks about the architecture for ADMS, it talks about ICT backbone, etc. The institutional framework that I was talking about proposes 4 models. So model A is to create a separate non-profit entity. And this is what has been mentioned in draft NEP, National Electricity Policy 2021. But then there are other options also available like model B or C, where in model B, we propose that the existing area load dispatch centers could be converted into DSOs, or in model C, we say that there are few discoms who have already started discharging duties of DSO in the country, some urban discoms. So maybe in the near future, we can convert these discoms by adding a set of new functionalities into them to make them DSOs. And then model D talks about repackaging of existing and new entities. So we carve out certain functions from the existing discoms and create a separate entity to take care of those functions. So that's model D, so long as institutional framework is concerned. Here is a comparison between 4 models, and you have key functions that I had mentioned in the previous slide, and who would do what. That is what is shown in this slide. For example, ownership of distribution network would be with distribution network company. But if the distribution network company itself becomes DSO, then in option C, it becomes the owner of the network. Then the integrated network planning becomes the joint responsibility of DSO as well as the local wire company or the distribution network company. Scheduling dispatch, market facilitation, etc. would become responsibility of DSO, be it any model. Then we are introducing retailers, private retailers to take care of retail business. So looking at these models, the DSO evolution is expected to take shape like this. So we have existing DISCOM functions. So if we add some technological advancements and enhanced functions, we start with a modest way for DSO functions, and we call it as a shallow DSO. Slowly we end up ring fencing some of the DSO functions, and then we do functional and financial separation of those functions. So this is basically model D, where we create a few new entities, carve out certain jobs from the existing discoms and give them the DSO responsibility. And finally, we have fully functional independent DSO. So whenever we have independent entity in place, we call it as a deep DSO. So we may start with model D and eventually move towards model A. That is the plan. So long as market design is concerned, market design discussion is based on 4 pillars of market design, which are shown in this slide. Now these 4 pillars have been so Sally Hunt's book mentions about 4 pillars of design for the wholesale level market. So this slide is inspired by this concept provided by Sally Hunt. So there are 4 pillars of market design that we envisage: scheduling and dispatch, because conventionally speaking, India has been working on decentralized way of operation. So the distribution discoms, they provide a requisition for the power in the power stations. So that's the decentralized way of scheduling. But then when you have large scale DRs embedded, then the scheduling and dispatch altogether becomes a different ball game. So it might so happen that we would have certain layers of centralized and decentralized operations in the future. So this is one important pillar of market design. Then the flexibility. So how do we really make use of the flexibility associated with the DRs, and then how do we bring them in the market fold? That is another challenge. So market design so there'll be different commodities which would come into the market apart from the energy. So that becomes another pillar of market design. Settlement is very important because whenever you have market, whenever you have contracts, trades, there's going to be deviation. And what could be deviation settlement framework? And then who is going to provide the provision of last resort, POLR? That is another pillar of market design. And of course, TSO DSO coordination is an essential activity when you have DSO in place. Stage wise, what we propose is that depending on the level of DRs penetrated into the system, we can classify them into low, medium, and high DRs. And then we have stage-wise implementation of a competitive model for trading commodities. So when we have low level of DRs, we continue with the present model. When we have medium DRs, we go with the procurement model. Procurement model is something like where we don't have the competitive market, but kind of tariff is set for different commodities by the regulator. And then in stage 3, we have competitive model, fully competitive model, and where we can have bilateral or P2P kind of a thing, or we can have the centralized market or platform to do the energy and other commodity transactions. So I think I'll stop here and I'll request Mr. Saxena to take up from here onwards. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Abhyankar. Thanks a lot. Am I audible?
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
Yeah, so thank you so much. I think this slide shows the regulatory aspects which we have tried to bring out as part of the recommendations and findings in the white paper. Now, before going on to these options, etc., what are mentioned here, I would just like to mention that the distribution of electricity in India is a licensed activity, and the license for the same is sort of provided by the appropriate commission, whether it could be state commission or a joint electricity regulatory commission, depending on the jurisdiction what is available. And in India, we have a hierarchical system of power system operation and control, starting with the National Load Dispatch Center at the apex level and going down below to the regional load dispatch centers, the state load dispatch centers, and then the sub-load dispatch centers or the area load dispatch centers. Now, the distribution system operation function is being performed ever since the distribution system comes into being. Now, the degree of the automation and the degree of metering and the infrastructure define the shape and character of the distribution system operation in various utilities. But then I think the function is being performed ever since the birth of the distribution system, which is there. Now, when we try to look at the regulations and the Act and the regulations and the codes which are there in regard to the distribution system operation, we find that State Load Dispatch Center is the apex body established under the Electricity Act for ensuring integrated operation of the intrastate system, and most importantly, it has to carry out the real-time operations for grid control and dispatch of electricity. Now, as distribution licensee, when it has been defined in the Act, it also is authorized to operate and maintain the distribution system. So we look at that there is a state load dispatch center, but there is a distribution licensee, and we find the two combinations to be there. In one of the combination, what is there, that the distribution licensee has established an area load dispatch center and they perform the distribution system operation related functions. And in another variant, the state load dispatch center has established a sub-state load dispatch center which carries out the functions of the distribution system operation. So I think the options which could be there, I think there's no one size fits all, but I think we are of the opinion that we would not like to shake the things very vigorously to start with. I think the states may continue to adopt any model, whatever they have. So first option, they may continue to work under the distribution licensee. They may continue to work as a sub SLDC under an SLDC. And eventually, I think they should move to perform the distribution system operation function as a statutory function, like the one which is being done by the State Load Dispatch Center through the provisions under the Electricity Act. So these are the options, and then I think one could move, the states could choose their own model depending on their maturity and depending on the requirements that they feel about. Now, then we come to about what are the code. There are a number of codes which are there. I think there is a distribution code, there is a supply code, there is a state grid code, and there's above all there is an Indian electricity grid code for the interstate system, etc. I'm not mentioning other ones which are there, but in many of the cases, existing codes and regulations will need modification for handling the active distribution system and the DRs which are going to be there. And we may also require to add new functions, and maybe new regulations also may be required. The scheduling and dispatch aspect, the network planning, cyber security, coordination, forecasting, market facilitation, etc. They would require to be revisited in this context. On to the next slide, we find that there are recommendations which we have given in regard to the human resource and skill requirement. When we try to look at the functions which are to be performed by a distribution control center, I think the SCADA management group, it needs to have a distribution system operation group, a communication support group, network planning and analysis group, and the energy metering accounting group. All of them are self-explanatory and are extremely important for performing the functions of a DSO in an efficient and effective manner. Moving on to the next slide, we find that the cost benefit analysis is an important aspect, and this document is primarily aimed at gaining the attention of the policymakers and the decision makers in regard to the introduction of DSO in various states. And the policymakers and they invariably look at the cost benefit analysis. And here we have tried to give an example of a BSES Rajdhani, which is a private utility which has come into being since into about 2004 or 2005. And if you look at the total capital expenditure for the utility for the 2 years that put together, it's of the order of about 1400 crores. And if we look at out of 1400 crore, about 36 crore is the capital investment in this SCADA and GIS system, which constitutes only about 2.5% of the total capital expenditure made in those 2 years. And we have tried, this is sourced from the tariff orders in respect of the utility by the Delhi Electricity Regulatory Commission, and what all it includes is very bulleted in with the star mark there. And interestingly, we tried to find out the levelized cost expenditure of SCADA and GIS, and based on the CRC norms, etc. And it works out to approximately 0.33 paisa per kilowatt hour of the electricity which is handled by the distribution utility. When we go on to look at the benefits in the next slides, I think we know that there are tangible benefits and intangible benefits. There are direct benefits and indirect benefits. The improvement in power supply and its quality, reduction in O&M costs, deferral of capital investment, the relevant data which becomes available that provides a number of insights, and it could provide additional revenue. It could provide revenue through the demand response without any doubt. And then there could be another benefit like renewable integration, which reduces the carbon emissions. The blackouts could be reduced. The image of the DISCOM could improve very substantially on account of improved power supply availability, quality and reliability. And the skill upgradation is very certainly very much there. And it leads to a motivated staff and personnel, which in turn ultimately leads to the customer satisfaction and the willingness to pay. Interestingly, in India, the customers have the capability to pay, but it is the willingness to pay which is also a big question. And when we have an improved quality and reliability of supply, the willingness to pay increases very substantially, and that can increase the revenue of the distribution utilities appreciably. Moving on to the next slide, we find that we have tried to see that how should the implementation be done and what should be the approach. All the states cannot start introducing the whatever variant of DSO they want to have, and we find that there are 4 drivers. We try to look at 4 of the drivers which are listed at the top of the slide. First is the rooftop solar PV penetration, which is there. What is the penetration today and what is the penetration which they have targeted for? That's number 1. Second is what is the electric vehicle population today and what is the target which they have taken for this state. Third is what is the deployment of smart meter and what is the target in respect of that. And fourthly and importantly, that whether an area load dispatch center or a distribution control center or a state load dispatch center exists or not. And then we found that we can cluster them in various groups, and in cluster 1 we find that Gujarat, Maharashtra, Uttar Pradesh and Tamil Nadu, they are the ones who have, say, from these 4 drivers consideration, they could be the first set of movers towards the implementation of DSO in the discoms in the respective state. And thereafter, in the second set, we have the Rajasthan in the light blue color, the states like Punjab, Rajasthan, Delhi, Madhya Pradesh, etc. and so on. So I think a phased approach can be taken, because wherever the readiness of infrastructure is there and the potential is there, and I think the requirement is there, I think that is what could be driving the implementation in various states. When we go on to the next slide, we find that we have given a DSO implementation plan, and that plan gives this gives you the 4 building blocks. And I think the foundation of DSO would be in the AMI and the automatic distribution management system and the SCADA. Then on the next building block is the DSO operations. How do we do the DER management? What are the business models and what advanced applications would be required? And thirdly, then we should come look at the DSO coordination, DSO TSO coordination in regard to the data exchange and management and all other aspects such as flexibility, coordination, etc. Then fourthly, the market design, which has to be the finally with the multitude of transactions which are going to be there at the prosumer level and with the DERs being there, I think the market design assumes extreme importance. And this is what we thought about could be the building blocks for the DSO implementation. And with this, I think I have come to a close of the presentation of the white paper prepared by the IIT Delhi, IIT Kanpur and Terry. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Saxena. Mr. Abhyankar, I request Professor Bose to present the updates from your side. Yeah, you're muted, Professor Bose.
Sanjeev, I think this is the appropriate time to ask some questions from because they presented a comprehensive report. I think this before I change the subject, maybe the right time to.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good point. So I see one question from Subir. As of 2019, there are more than 80% of the energy still traded in India in a bilateral form. So what do you think about the success of competitive market in the retail end?
Professor Abhyankar, would you like to take a call?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Subir, for asking this question. Yeah, so of course, if the market has taken long time to evolve at the wholesale level, no doubt it is going to take time to evolve at the distribution sector as well. But then you have to understand the sheer scale in terms of the number of entities that would get hooked to the grid, who would be wanting to trade the commodities. So the volume, I cannot say, I mean, I'm not in a position to comment on it, but the number of entities who would be willing to trade the commodities. And when I say commodities, I'm not only talking about energy, I'm talking about all electricity commodities related to flexibility as well. The number of entities would be very large. That's what my feeling is. And of course, in India also, I expect that to happen. But the volume, well, nothing can be said at this stage. At least I'm not geared up to answer this. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else want to ask a question directly? Just unmuting. Okay, so I see no more hand raises. So
let me ask a question then to just you see, there are so many entities involved, but as Dr. Saxena mentioned, the responsibility for reliability and so on is hierarchical. It starts from the National Control Center to the next level of control centers, the regional and then the state and maybe the sub-state levels. And that probably won't change. I mean, you may call any of those entities a DSO. And so my question was, where does the DSO fit in this hierarchy? Right, the hierarchy already exists and they have some names. And because when I read your summary report and listened, I was somewhat confused between DISCOM and DSO. Are they going to be the same entity or are they going to be different entities?
So, Professor Bose, if I have to answer this, I would, the DSO is going to be an entity which will be taking shape gradually. And, right now the distribution system operation functions are being done either by the distribution licensee through an area load dispatch center or by a sub SLDC. Now, we tend to say that let this proposition continue in whichever manner the states want to do. They can continue to adopt the model which they have, but ultimately the spirit of Electricity Act is that the system operation has to be an independent and neutral function. So what they could do start with is that they could do a ring fencing of distribution system operation functions within the existing setup, whatever they have got. If you recall in the power at the grid level, when the power grid was set up, I think the system operation and control was entrusted to the Power Grid Corporation of India Limited, and the ring fencing of the RLDCs was sort of there. How practical it was or not, it was not there. That is what it is. But then that is the way to start, and ultimately you come out with an independent system operator, which is POSOCO today. So similarly, that is what we envisage, that this is one has to move towards an independent system operator, which could be an entity taking shape in due course. But as of now, I would say that DSO is hanging somewhere between the SLDC and the consumer. So whether it is in sub SLDC or an ALDC, that is what is the DSO. We can cut because the operations are being performed. What we are trying to say that these operations, because of the active distribution management system and other types of the supervision and control and the data requirement which are going to be there, I think they need a lot of changes which are required to be there. In the existing form, they cannot continue to deliver efficiently and effectively what is required to be delivered, and they have to be finding a way. And I think given the setup we have, the power is in the concurrent list in the Constitution of India. And I think the setup we have, I think the freedom and of choice should be with them. But the practical approach would be let them decide. And this is what they are hanging today, and ultimately become an independent entity under the SLDC without any doubt. And that's what is my take onto this. If I have missed anything, I think Professor Abhyankar, you want to add?
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
You see, the terms TSO and DSO, first started out in Europe, and they have a very clear picture of what these mean. The TSO is always the grid operator, and usually countrywide grid operator, and then the DSO are the distribution licensees, as you call them, underneath them, and they have their own distribution control centers, and so those are much clearly defined. When the term DSO is even though we use it in America, it really doesn't have a real definition in practice, and the term we use, ISO here and not TSO, also has somewhat similar function in terms of reliability of the bulk grid. It actually, in effect, is quite different than the TSO in Europe, because the TSOs in Europe actually own the transmission, whereas in the ISOs in the US don't own anything except the ability to operate that transmission. But so the concern that has sort of surfaced in the US in light of the the DERs being added to the market, to the wholesale market, is coming from our distribution operators who are saying that, hey, that's great, you can do anything you want with the market, but we have to be in the loop to know what the hell is going on with the DERs within our operational domain, because we are ultimately responsible for the reliability of this domain. You just can't turn on and off things without our knowing. And so the function, the DSO function in Europe are very much the people who run the DMSs, the control centers. So that hierarchy is rather important in terms of the reliability of the grid. And so I think that this is I think I agree with Dr. Saxena that these things will evolve because the technology will evolve, the market will evolve, but ultimately somebody will have to be responsible.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Bose.
Yeah, thank you. I see hand raised by Subir. So can you brief it, your question or comments?
So,
thank you.
Yeah, hello. So I have got another question. So if you think about how if you think about the electricity market, then you have to think about is parallel to the TSO market. As we all know about the limitations of the energy only market, and it is heavily limited by the scarcity pricing and all, and then oftentimes the scarcity prices are undervalued because of the multiple regulatory bodies, and then and we know that because of the energy only market is not too much successful, and then we have got the capacity payment and all the stuff.
Excuse me, Subir, now, I can't hear you.
Okay, so yeah, sorry. So we'll take this one at the end. Sorry, Subir. So I think I'll let Professor Bose to present from your side.
So let me try and share my screen, okay?
Very scary.
Yeah.
Yeah, what? Yeah, and with SQL, they took it out, out of a SQL. He said that. So that yeah. So okay, I know you guys take care of us anyway. So it depends. So it's not gone out of your account, our account rather, and.
Okay, I'm not sure if you can see it.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, it's looking funny on my screen, but
so it's a full screen on our side.
Okay.
Well, give me the can you give me the number?
So I'm sorry, I'm in a hotel room, so there's some noise in the background. But what I'm showing you is just a list of things we've been talking about in markets, policies, technical standards, and so on, that's coming out of the many themes that the US team is kind of working on. And so I hope, what I hope to do here is to kind of start a dialogue between the US team and the Indian team as to what are the maybe 3 or 4 major policy type things that will come out of the UI Assist project. All right. So, and there is, in some cases, there will be a lot of overlap between what the Indian team is doing and what we are doing. And that is maybe our policy recommendations would be very similar. In other cases, it may be quite different. The reason I bring that up is like, if you think about the retail markets issues, I think both Professor Abhyankar and Professor Annaswamy at MIT have been sort of designing retail markets, which is a little different from the kind of market that FERC is now proposing, where DERs are going to be part of the wholesale market. So there may be some recommendations there on the markets theme that will be very similar to what may come out of the Indian work as much as here. And they were both out of theme 7 work. Another piece of the markets thing that I think you mentioned already in your report, Dr. Saxena, is the numbers of small DERs that are going to come into the market. And here, sometimes people refer to these as nanogrids. And so some of the work done by TAMU, by Texas A&M on theme 8 and 9 worries about the data exchanges that would be necessary to, and how many entities would be necessary. Obviously, all the nanogrid owners will have to be part of it, but so will have to be aggregators, and so will have to be the state load dispatch center and all of those. So that's another area where both both the regulators will have to jump in and say that this kind of information will have to be shared between these entities to be able to run such a market. Okay, so that's my second bullet here. Going to policies, another area that came out of, again, by Texas A&M on theme 3 was the use of EVs will stress our secondary transformers for sure. This is actually a major issue for the power companies right now. But the one policy that may be affected directly by that is the policies, the standards that are used by the power companies for maintenance and life maintenance of secondary transformers. Because if the secondary transformers, which today are very often are far from being maximum loaded for very long periods of time, will probably be much more loaded if they're going to be EVs being charged every night. And so that's going to be one another area where some standards may have to be changed. Quickly to bring in two other areas that I think we will probably flush out a lot more is the reliability and resiliency of DERs. The one thing that has come out very strongly in the last couple of years here in the US is that the planning, the long-term planning of generation, that is generation adequacy, has been very, very problematic, that we are not doing very good planning beyond a couple of years in terms of generation adequacy. And so, and you already know that the issues are going to be
thank you.
are going to be
Okay, all right, so I spend all this time.
an issue, because our data collection long-term, that will affect long-term, like the lifetime of these DERs, their availability, their statistics, and things are completely missing. And I think there's quite a bit of work going on in theme 6 by Chen and Singh, specifically on this issue as to what kind of data would be needed to be collected to get statistical information that can be used in doing longer term planning. And then finally, the short-term planning, operations planning, or even during operations. I think there are several themes that WSU is working on between WSU and West Virginia in Theme 4, Theme 5, and Theme 6 about both resiliency metrics or reliability metrics needs to be brought in, and this has become really difficult today because everybody's worrying about the big storms and the ability to restore the grid, especially the distribution grid that is happening. So I thought I will throw out these few items here. None of them has been fleshed out completely, just to see if there is some interest on the Indian side to actually also come up with a similar set of issues, because we're coming down to the last year or so of this project, and so we have to wait till some of these themes, some of the technical results from these themes are surfacing to see which ones of these we should stand up to policymakers or market designers or whoever else, and standards makers. I'll stop there. I think we're running pretty close to time, and would like to get some comments from the Indian side.
Thank you, Professor Bose. I think we are right on time, so would like to comment.
Just one comment I would like to make. So Professor Bose mentioned about generation adequacy. So one of our expert members over here has given us feedback that the draft version of DSO white paper that we have come out with lacks a topic on resource adequacy. So he wants us to elaborate on the resource adequacy when DSOs would come into picture. So that is something that all of us, we are collectively working on. I can see that there is a similar thinking on both sides, so long as resource adequacy is concerned.
Right.
Long-term planning, yeah.
So I think Professor Bose, I would very quickly like to add that the points which you have flagged are extremely important. If I want to talk about from the policy perspective, yes, the use of electric vehicles is certainly going to be stressing the distribution transformers, the secondary transformers, and then one has to dig deeper into this. As a solution, what we think about is that the time of use tariff and the smart charging would be essentially required for this. But yes, this is an issue which needs to be understood and addressed. I think it'll be good to exchange notes and see what further we can do on this. That's number one. Secondly, about the reliability and resilience, they are certainly important, and resource adequacy would certainly, I think this is going to be a recommendation that every distribution utility has to do the resource adequacy, and that too duly keeping in mind the demand profile which will be impingent on the grid, the net demand profile which will be incident on the grid, distribution grid, that they should do the resource adequacy planning and they should spell it out. Data collection, I think it's an extremely important point what you have touched about. I think we have consciously not touched upon this aspect in the white paper because it is meant for policy considerations and the policy makers. But then this is an important point which was discussed during this stakeholders workshop, and we should be working towards it. That certainly it is extremely important, number one, to spell out that what data would be required from the ground level up to the distribution control center, and then the hierarchical system, then what data goes from the DCC towards the SLDC and towards the higher hierarchical levels, and at what periodicity it should come in, and then what detailing and granularity is required in order to do the analysis. I think certainly this is an important point where we can exchange notes and try to do something better.
So I think, Sanjeev, we're running out of time, but let me just plant a couple of thoughts where we can work together. One of the problems with talking about policy and regulations and so on is that there's so many things there that we can easily, and we all have opinions or at least some knowledge on many of these things. So I was trying to limit the policy issues and regulations issues and so on to UI assist and not to just general things that the rest of us are maybe doing outside of the UI assist project. So at least we focus it down to a few items that way. Okay, and we can claim that it came out of our work for the last 5 years that we've been doing on this thing. That's one point. On the data issue, to us, that is a policy and regulatory issue because at least in America, data, because a lot of things are privately owned, data is often considered proprietary and not available to anybody. And unless it is required by the government or by some regulatory agency that this data is required for the reliability of the grid and for the running of the grid, it won't happen. So that's why I think in my slides you see that a lot more things about data. So I'll stop there. And what I intend to do is, of course, we'll send you these slides, but I have a little bit more detailed thing, about 2 pages worth of bullets that I can share with you, just to keep these topics, not details, but the topics alive in our Theme 10 conversation.
Sure, Professor Bose. I think that will be extremely helpful and that will be paving the way forward.
Sure.
So I'll conclude here. So thank you, Professor Abhyankar, posting the answers in the chat. Thank you all the presenters, and it's glad we had a good updates on both the sides, from the policy and technical standard side. Okay. Thank you everyone for joining this webinar. We already passed six minutes, so I respect everyone's time here. Thank you everyone, and have a good rest of your day on your side, and have a good night at night.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
It
was nice to be here. Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care, all of you. Good night and have a great day.